Hey guys, today we're going to cover some events that bring the country closer to civil war, which is why your objective question is what major events brought the US closer to civil war. First thing we're going to talk about is one we've already covered, but I want to make sure it's fresh in everybody's mind. Missouri is saying, hey, we would really like to join the country, we would like to become a state, but there's some bickering going on, because up until this point there had been an even number of slave and free states, and that's very important, because if one, either slave or free state, would gain more people, more states, they'd become more powerful and could outvote the other side. So it's very important that there's a balance struck, and that's exactly what the Missouri Compromise works to do. The outcome of the Missouri Compromise is that Missouri is going to enter as a free state, but to keep things equal, we're also going to add Maine as a free state. So we're keeping the balance of power. And then the last portion of the Missouri Compromise is the dividing line. We're going to draw a line across the rest of the country and say, from now on, even though Missouri is the exception because it's above the line, from now on, everything above will be free and everything below will be slave. And that was okay with everybody, because the Northerners said, ha ha ha, look at all this extra land we get. And the Southerners saying, ha ha ha, we don't want that land because stuff can't grow there. So this was a perfect compromise. A compromise is when you make a deal and both sides walk away feeling like they won, right? Remember that this was Henry Clay's. Now, this was a very effective compromise that remains in place for almost 30 years. However, as we move forward as a country and things change, obviously we're going to have to alternate that. So here's once again a little map for you. Cool. Another map. Cool. All right. Brings us to the Compromise of 1850. As we mentioned a few days ago when we were talking about the gold rush, California is also going to enter as a state. But are they going to be free or slave? Because if we look back at this map, right, the area that California is going to be in is both above and below the line. So what are we going to do there? Well, we come up with the Compromise of 1850. Remember, a compromise. Neither side gets exactly what they want, but they both have to get some. And the Compromise of 1850 has 5 major parts. The first is that California is going to enter. And even though a portion of California is below the line, they're going to be a free state. The second portion is that the area that we got from Mexico when we fought that war is going to be divided into Utah and New Mexico, and slavery there is going to be decided by popular sovereignty, which means the people who live there get to decide whether or not they want to have slavery or not. Thirdly, we're going to end the slave trade in Washington, D.C. This doesn't end slavery in Washington, D.C., but it ends the slave trade. Also, we're going to make a very strict, and this is probably the most important part of the Compromise of 1850, is the fugitive slave law. We'll talk more about that in just a second, but know that's an aspect of the Compromise of 1850. And then last, we're going to be able to settle some boundary problems between Texas and New Mexico. So kind of like up there, right? But the most important is the Fugitive Slave Act. Now, once again, this is a compromise, so it's not a total win for either side, but it does put off any kind of, maybe talkings of war or anything, because both sides walk away saying, okay, right? California gets to be free, slave trade's ended, popular sovereignty, so there is a chance they could be slave, and also the fugitive slave law. Right, so here we go. This is the Utah Territory, right? New Mexico Territory. Remember, these look different than they do now. These aren't states yet. These are territories, but California is a state way over here, and it's a free state. Now, the fugitive slave law, very important, probably the most important aspect of the Compromise of 1850 to know. Basically, the fugitive slave law made it illegal to help or to house any slaves that have run away. Okay, so fugitive. If you're a fugitive, you're running, right? If you're a fugitive slave, it means you've escaped and you're running away. This makes it illegal to help any slaves who have run away. And this is mostly applying, of course, to the Northerners. Now, if you're caught violating this, you can be fined up to $1,000, which is a lot of money back then, and you can be jailed for up to this thing. Also, when slaves are captured and brought in, which is what you're supposed to do now under the Fugitive Slave Act, they are judged whether or not they should be returned to their master or set free. But the judges, and this is really corrupt right here, the judges get $10 if they decide to return the slave to an owner, and only $5 if they decide to let him go free. So what are a majority of judges doing no matter what the evidence says? They're returning the slaves, right? And that's for purely selfish profit there. A lot of black people who were free slaves were being captured and sent back to the South as escaped slaves. So this is really, really negative. And the most important aspect of the fugitive slave law is Northerners don't like it because now, instead of just kind of turning a blind eye to slavery and saying that's the South thing, at least I'm in the North, now Northerners are complicit in slavery. They are required by law to support the institution of slavery. And this is going to upset a lot of people. All right, that's the most important part about this, right? The Fugitive Slave Act, it forces the Northerners to participate in slavery. Not a good look. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about this blue area right here, Nebraska and Kansas. Let's talk about it. The Missouri Compromise is going to hold true until the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So we divide that area into two areas, Kansas and Nebraska, which we just saw in that last map. And we decide with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, instead of it being free, like the Compromise of 1820 said, like the Missouri Compromise said, instead, those areas are going to be decided based on popular sovereignty, which means the people who live there are going to vote and decide. And if more people want it to be slave, then it will be slave. If more people want it to be free, it'll be free. The problem with this is people are going to rush to those new territories to gain the biggest amount of population as possible. So if I'm a Northerner who's really, really against slavery, and I find out that Kansas is going to be decided on the votes, I'm going to round up all the anti-slavery people I can get, and I'm going to rush to Kansas so I can vote against it. If I'm someone in the South who wants slavery, then I'm going to round up all my pro-slavery people, and I'm going to rush there and vote for slavery. So people start rushing in. This leads to an event, kind of a time period, mostly an event called Bleeding Kansas. And this is where you get a ton of really, really passionate pro-slavery and really, really passionate anti-slavery people in the same area, all wanting power, and violence ensues. There's a lot of destruction, violence, and what's the other word? Vandalism going on at this point. Also, another development we see is that the Democratic Party is going to begin to lose power in the South lose power in the North and gain power in the South. At this point in time, Democrats are, for the most part, pro-slavery. Another political party starts to emerge, and this political party becomes known as the Republican Party. The Republican Party is extremely against slavery, and this is obviously a very big generalization. Not every single Democrat was pro-slavery, not every single Republican was against slavery. There are little tiny, cohorts of different things, but for the most part at this point, Democrats are pro-slavery in the South, Republicans are against slavery in the North. Now, another important decision that occurs around this time is the Dred Scott decision. I'm going to fly through this a little bit. To make a really, really, really long story short, Dred Scott was a slave who, for a while, underneath his master, lived in a free state. And when they returned to the slave state and his owner died, he said, hey, I think I should be free because I lived in a free state. My owner's dead now. I want to, be free. And they took a lawsuit all the way to the Supreme Court. And instead of agreeing with him or disagreeing with his argument, the Supreme Court says, you're a slave. You're property. You're not even allowed to file a lawsuit. This was huge. That is so incredible that the Supreme Court comes to that decision. And also the more important, well, besides how horrible that is, the most important part of the Dred Scott decision is that Congress says, the Supreme Court says that Congress cannot ban slavery in any territories. This is huge. This is going to completely eliminate the Missouri Compromise. This means that no matter what area of the country the area is in, if enough people want slavery, they can get it. The Southerners love this, the Northerners hate this. This means that at anywhere in our country, if there are enough people who want slavery, they could get it. This is bad. Caning of Charles Sumner, my personal favorite. Charles Sumner gave a speech to Congress, and it was basically a really, really long metaphor equating slavery to prostitution. And he was basically saying that all the Southerners were like pimps who loved prostitutes. And it was very graphic, and he wasn't very, tactful. It was very, very blunt what he was saying. But he especially went after Andrew Butler, a man of South Carolina. And Andrew Butler wasn't there, but his cousin, Preston Brooks, was there. And Brooks got really, really offended and decided he wanted revenge. So Charles Sumner, the guy who made the speech, calling the guy basically a prostitute, or not a prostitute, but a pimp, basically. Anyway, Charles Sumner gets beat by a cane. a lot, almost to death. He's going to suffer for the rest of his life. He's going to have this horrible pain. He's in bed for months recovering. He's going to have a limp. He's partially blind. It was crazy. He was nearly bludgeoned to death on the Senate floor. Now, long story short, why is this important? It's showing that it's not just the hillbillies out in the West and the South who are fighting about slavery. It's not just the really, really radical abolitionists in the North who are fighting about slavery. These are the elected gentlemen of our nation who are literally beating each other to a pulp over this issue. It shows that it's a prominent United States issue. Also, I know what you've been thinking, who the heck is the president at this point? And unfortunately for them, these presidents we're about to cover very, very rapidly don't get a lot of credit. Most of them are one-termers. Some of them die. So last time we talked about any presidents, we talked about Polk. And Polk was the one who really wanted Oregon, and he wanted to expand, and blah, 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 blah. Remember that when he was nominated and people were kind of upset, he said, listen, I promise I'm only going to serve one term. And he was true to that. After his one term, he had his 4 goals. He served 4 years. He got all 4 goals, completed and said, all right, like I said, I'm done. So the Whigs nominate Zachary Taylor. This guy here, Zachary Taylor, very famous in the Mexican-American War. He's nominated by the Whigs, and he wins. Unfortunately, a few months into his presidency, he drinks some rotten milk and eats some sketchy berries, and he dies. The Whigs are like, oh, right? So then, of course, this man, his vice president, Millard Fillmore, becomes president. He only serves 1 term. After that, Franklin Pierce. Now, Franklin Pierce, he's very pro-slavery. He's also described as one of the most handsome presidents we've ever had. So, decide for yourself. And then after Franklin Pierce only serves for 1 term, next we have this man right here, James Buchanan. James Buchanan, most historians agree, was the worst president in United States history. And the reason for that is because he seemingly did basically nothing to prevent the Civil War from breaking out. So anyway, all of these presidents, right, boom, 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 we went through Polk, Zachary Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, and Buchanan, and now that takes us to the election of 1860. And the election of 1860 has a Republican running who looks very interesting, and his name is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, running in the election of 1860. He says he's going to stop the spread of slavery, he's going to impose tariffs, and he's going to give free land in the West to settlers. He looks very appealing. As we probably know, the election of 1860, Lincoln's going to run, obviously, as a Republican. The Southerners don't like him. The Southerners don't even put him on the ballot in the South. He literally wasn't even an option if you were in a Southern state, and he still manages to win. Southerners are angry. They said that if half the entire country doesn't even have him on a ballot, how is he possibly getting elected? This obviously means the North has too much power. We're starting to get angry. And once again, Southerners start talking about seceding or leaving the country, right? And I'll leave it there. Next week, we're going to talk about the official start of the Civil War, some awesome battles, some great speeches, and the end of one of the bloodiest wars or the bloodiest war the United States has ever seen. All right, make sure to answer your objective question. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.